Embodied carbon, tackling the enigma. Outline. 1. We got carried away. 2. Carbon, the menace. 3. Holding the manufacturing companies accountable. 4. Holding the renewable energy assets producing companies to strict regulations. 5. Introducing the carbon repayment cycle. 6. The nature conservation option. We got carried away. Renewable energies have given the world a ray of hope over the dark clouds of climate change. Energy efficiency measures have also increased the possibilities of cutting down on greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. But whilst we focused campaigns and moral persuasions on individuals and businesses to compel them to cut down on their carbon footprints, we have somewhat forgotten that the production of these renewable energy assets also contribute a significant quota to carbon flaring. This is called embodied carbon. In the euphoria of discovering ways to create energy from non-fossil fuel sources, we have taken our eyes off the ball. We started singing victory songs when we still had enemy spies in our camp. Embodied carbon, as known as embedded carbon, is the last piece of the puzzle which is yet to be cracked. It is important to note at this point that whilst the possibilities provided by renewable energies are laudable, our ultimate goal from the onset was carbon neutrality, not low carbon. If it was just the attainment of a low carbon status, gas as an energy source had provided a viable alternative for the world, barring the carbon flaring which also takes place during gas explorations. But the global agenda is zero carbon, and all oars mustn't rest till we paddle our ways to that desired destination. This book seeks to unravel the carbon enigma. It also proposes a tailored route which will see the world to true carbon neutrality by proposing the carbon repayment cycle. This process, if meticulously followed, will clear a pathway for our planet to the zero carbon status within a few decades. Carbon, the menace. Climate change has become a worrying subject for the world today. And central to this scourge is carbon. Global temperatures are climbing, resulting in heat waves, encroaching deserts, rising sea levels, and many other unwanted natural occurrences. Carbon is a GHG, which is generated when fossil fuels are burned. The main types of fossil fuels include oil, coal, and gas. Perhaps it is important to note that the major effect of excessive carbon in our atmosphere is that it traps the heat released by the Earth in the atmosphere. This, coupled with the heat directed at the Earth from the sun's rays, make temperatures on our planet steadily rise. The result is global warming. If we must drastically cut down the effects of global warming, carbon emissions into the atmosphere must be reduced. And this can be achieved by a global shift from fossil fuels to renewable sources for power generation. The importance of renewable energies in the global quest to combat climate change cannot be overemphasized. Another major attraction of renewable energy sources is that they do not get depleted. Unlike fossil fuels, renewable sources get replenished easily. Some of the major sources of renewable energy include solar energy. Perhaps the most abundant form of renewable energy all over the globe is solar energy. This energy, which is derived from the sun's rays, is quite resourceful. It delivers power and electricity that is used for cooling, heat, and lighting. The solar energy technology is the process through which photovoltaic PV panels convert sunlight into electrical energy. Wind energy. This uses the power of the wind. As a process, the wind turns blade-like propellers around a rotor. As the propellers turn, they spin a generator, which ultimately creates electricity. It is important to place wind turbines in locations that have strong winds, so that maximum outputs can be generated. Furthermore, wind energy can be deployed onshore or offshore. Hydropower. Here, energy is accessed through the movement of water from high to low points. Particularly, hydroelectric power is often generated using a dam to influence the flow of water. And as the water rushes down, turbines and generators are used to convert kinetic energy to electricity. Biomass. This is also called bioenergy. It is the process of generating power from organisms. As a process, it utilizes plant-based materials amongst others as a sort of fuel to produce electricity. The most common materials used for bioenergy include agricultural wastes, energy crops, and even wood residues. It is, however, important to highlight at this point that though biomass is considered as a renewable energy source, it can also be non-renewable, depending on the materials used during energy generation. The opponents of biomass strongly appraise it as a non-renewable energy source, due to the GHG emissions that take place during the energy conversion process. There is also the subtle matter of deforestation, which is often a byproduct of biomass energy activities. Geothermal. This is deriving energy from the heat within the earth. Wells are drilled into reservoirs to tap hot steam. The steam then rotates a turbine, which in turn activates a generator, and then electricity is produced. Aside from the steam which is derived from the bowels of the earth, hot water can also be gotten during the process to supply heating during cold seasons. These renewable sources of energy have significantly reduced carbon emissions on our planet. But as the world embarks on various campaigns to see renewable energy sources replace fossil fuels, there is the underlying argument that the process of producing energy through these renewable sources emits a significant amount of carbon into our atmosphere. This then makes the whole agenda of shifting energy sources insincere or flawed. Worse is the argument that most countries in the West only care about their environments, and are inconsiderate to the plight of the environments where the bulk of these renewable energy assets are produced. Most of the renewable energy assets used in the world today are produced in Asia, hence the carbon flaring happens more in the Eastern Hemisphere. To ensure transparency and the longevity of climate change objectives, there must be a total approach to the agenda. Carbon flared in Asia will ultimately affect the world as a whole, given that all elements in nature are connected and are not mutually exclusive from each other. To ensure that energies gotten from renewable sources are truly carbon neutral, the process of producing the renewable energy assets must be devoid of any GHG emissions. As previously discussed, carbon is mainly generated from fossil fuels, which are non-renewable energy sources. Giving the three major fossil fuels, coal, gas and oil, find below the carbon emitted for each per kilowatt-hour. For electricity generated from coal, which is a non-renewable source, carbon emissions are estimated at 525 grams per kilowatt-hour. For electricity generated from gas, carbon emissions are estimated at 184 grams per kilowatt-hour. For electricity generated from oil, carbon emissions are estimated at 247 grams per kilowatt-hour. Using the above estimated figures, let's calculate the carbon footprint in the below exercises. Scenario 1. A factory in Nairobi, Kenya, is powered by coal. Electricity generated for manufacturing monthly is 720,000 kilowatt-hours. What is the carbon footprint of this factory? Results. Carbon emissions from coal is estimated at 525 grams per kilowatt-hour. Therefore, total emissions for the month equals 0.525 kilograms 720,000 equals 378,000 kilogram. Scenario 2. It is winter in Ontario, Canada. Due to a huge drop in temperatures, an average home uses about 45 kilowatt-hours in coal-powered electricity. Each home also supplements the electricity from coal with that from heating oil. Electricity generated from heating oil is estimated to be about 20 kilowatt-hours. Calculate the average carbon footprint for each home in Ontario. Results. Using 0.525 kilograms per kilowatt-hour for coal-powered electricity and 0.247 kilograms per kilowatt-hour for heating oil-powered electricity, The estimated carbon footprint from an average home in Ontario equals 0.525 kilograms 45 plus 0.247 kilograms 20 equals 23.625 kilograms plus 4.94 equals 28.57 kilograms. Holding the manufacturing companies accountable. Manufacturing companies play a very significant role in our societies and economies. They are solely responsible for most of the products used by consumers, given that they translate raw materials into finished goods. It, however, is becoming increasingly clear that this indispensable role they perform is proving somewhat costly to our planet. And whilst we cannot deny their intrinsic value in the grand scheme of things, we must find a way to ensure the continued existence of these industries, without necessarily endangering our planet. Perhaps, at this point, it is important to allude that the equipment and machineries used by manufacturing and producing companies are very capital intensive. The power needed to run these machineries are also significant, which naturally explains why the carbon flaring consequences of their operations are also noticeable. Currently, novel energy systems are still unaffordable to most homes and domestic users. This is due to the high cost of installing these grids. And since the power needed by manufacturing and producing companies are extremely higher than the ones required for unit homes, it only suggests that the costs attendant in the process of switching from conventional power sources to renewables will also be humongous for these industries. This explains why most of them have refused to join or are lackadaisical about the Cleaner Earth campaign. It then becomes expedient to find ways of offsetting the carbon and GHG content in our atmosphere, pending the time when we can move all industries on Earth to the renewable plane. This movement process is also attainable, and is not rocket science. To facilitate true carbon neutrality on our planet, where all stakeholders would have moved on to renewable energy supplies, a carbon repayment cycle is proposed. This ideology is discussed in detail in subsequent chapters of this book. Let's now review ways through which governments and institutions can hold manufacturing and producing companies accountable to the zero carbon agenda. First and foremost on this list is carbon taxes. Ever since the days of human civilization, societies and governments have been administered and run with taxes. Levying some tax on carbon flaring and using the proceeds to combat climate change seems a mouth-watering proposition. Basic knowledge in science elucidates that plants, vegetations, and greens feed on some type of carbon. And since our goal is to reduce the presence of carbon in our atmosphere, we perhaps need to make our Earth greener, literally. Creating forests incurs some sort of expense. Expenses that could adequately be offset with the taxes levied on some of the chief culprits of carbon flaring. To ensure appropriate measurements and equity in billings, however, industries should be mandated to account for the carbon they dispense during their operations. Just the same way annual and biannual audits are published for public information and stakeholder awareness, legislation must compel manufacturing and producing companies to include carbon accounting in their financial statements. These accounted carbon figures can then be verified by institutional inspectors to ensure its veracity. For every kilogram of carbon emitted, it is proposed that industries be made to pay 5 cents in taxes. This implies that if carbon audits reveal that sample company ABCZ Industries flared 50,000 kilograms of carbon in the financial year ending 2021, the industry's accrued carbon taxes for that year would be $50,000. 0.05 equals $2,500, $2,500 US. This billed tax is meant to achieve two distinct results. One, the income from the tax will be used by the governments to create more forests and green vegetation that will compensate for and absorb the carbon being flared. Two, the tax is a direct fine levied on the manufacturing company, which is meant to compel the company's corporate governance to migrate its energy source to renewables. Carbon taxes, whilst viable a strategy, could have adverse economic implications. Without a doubt, the operational costs incurred from the taxes will be passed on to the final consumers. And if the manufacturing companies don't feel the direct pain of the taxes on their bottom lines, they wouldn't feel compelled to adopt renewable energy sources, which is the ultimate agenda of the carbon taxes. For societies that have strong institutions and governmental structures which control product prices, the carbon tax regimes could work. In developing countries, however, where price control is weak or absent, and inflation flies around unchecked, the levy of carbon taxes would only incentivize the manufacturing companies to exploit the consumers of their products. For economies that are vulnerable, and carbon taxes are the least favored option, a Plan B is required. This Plan B, which is second on my list, is what I call the energy migration loan. The energy migration loan is the process where the government uses its financial muscle and capacity to force change in the energy operations of manufacturing and producing companies. And I must say the process is quite capital intensive, even for the governments. To ensure that this is seamlessly executed, governments might need the support of international organizations and regional development banks, who would efficiently finance the process flows. The energy migration loan sees governments finance the installation of the renewable energy grids that are required by these manufacturing companies to power their operations. The new grids are installed, and immediately the government, through its overseeing institution or parastatal, decommissions any conventional power supply that was formerly used by the manufacturing company. The cost of the initial installation of the renewable energy grid is solely borne by the government, and is considered a financial loan to the company. Structured repayments will then be made to the government. These repayments are considered as energy savings by the concerned manufacturing company. These repayments can be scheduled monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on the agreement between the financing government and the beneficiary. The process is quite clear and simple. When the manufacturing company was powered by a conventional, non-renewable source of energy, regular payments were made to cater for energy billing. For companies who supplemented their power supply with generators, additional expenses were also incurred on petrol or diesel. These previous payments will no longer be applicable under this financial scheme. The only energy expenses which the manufacturing companies will now incur are the regular repayments they make to the governmental institution which finance their renewable energy grid. Most countries already have similar structures in place for farmers, traders, small and medium-scale entrepreneurs. During the COVID-19 pandemic, several governments in our world created bailout programs for businesses and individuals to help with their sustenance during the tough period. Let us consider this proposition as an energy bailout scheme. God knows our Earth really does need it. It is very clear that not all governments have the financial muscle to pull off this program easily. But as explained earlier, this is where international organizations and regional development banks earn their pay. The United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, United Nations Operations, UNOPs, and many other flagship bodies in the UN are poised for such activities. And then, we have the regional development banks. In Asia, we have the Asian Development Bank, ADP. In Africa, we have the African Development Bank, AFDB. Also, in Africa, an institution was set up in the West African Union, having a sole focus on renewable energy. This institution is called the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, ECRE. Governments in different countries can partner with the international agencies overseeing their regions to implement this financial program. Also, it must be noted that it's not in all cases that governments will need to take 100% of the financial responsibility in powering the concerned manufacturing companies. Depending on the financial capability and pedigree of the industrial company, the government can work out a shared arrangement for the financial cost of the renewable grid installation. For more established companies who have the financial muscle to implement this energy migration, a simple governmental decree or law mandating compliance will suffice. Let's take a financial example. Our dummy company, ABCZ Industries, uses an average of 9,000 kilowatt-hours of electricity annually from a conventional energy power source. In addition to this conventional power source, the manufacturing company also supplements their power needs with energy derived from diesel generators. The energy costs incurred by ABCZ Industries for the year ending 2021 are shown in Figure 1 below. Fig. 1. To move ABCZ Industries to total renewable energy supply, under our proposed scheme, the government decides to finance the installation of a renewable energy grid. The total installation cost of the required grid is $175,600. $175,600 only. Under this scheme, the financial repayment arrangement between the government and ABCZ Industries can be facilitated with the simple payback method. Simple payback is total cost of installation, annual savings. Using Fig. 1. Annual savings is the total cost of energy which was incurred by ABCZ Industries when it relied on a conventional source of energy supply in 2021, which equals $19,300. The structure of repayment using simple payback equals $175,619,300 equals 9.098. We could then safely deduce that ABCZ Industries' annual payments to the government will last for a total of 9 years. In this scenario, the government would not only have financed ABCZ Industries' move to renewables, but would also indirectly ensure that ABCZ Industries doesn't flare any carbon during the current year, and also in subsequent years. It will then be expected that ABCD Industries continue to generate their energy supply from renewable sources, even after the government's financial scheme is ended. For a more robust consideration of all variables involved in the transition to renewable energy supply, governments could adopt other renewable energy financial determinants in their administration of the proposed scheme. The levelized cost of energy (LCOE) is a favored option in this regard. To learn more about the use and application of LCOE, please review my book, Energy Efficiency: The Sustainable Solution to the Energy Crisis in Developing Countries. The third, and perhaps most important way to hold manufacturing companies accountable, is through legislation. World leaders can rally together in conferences for several decades, but without the right show of commitment, all will be a total waste of time. Speeches do little, if they're not followed by enacted laws and legislations. Without laws, mandating manufacturing and producing companies to migrate to renewable energies will be met with stiff bottlenecks, lawsuits and legal barriers. So the most important aspect of this carbon neutrality campaign should be the legal framework that justifies and enables the drive towards the zero carbon status. Currently, only a few countries in the world have actually shown some legal commitment to this agenda. And whilst these few might seem to have achieved giant strides, when we consider that we all share the same planet and are all affected by the effects of global warming in one way or another, then we realize that efforts when not jointly made by all are no efforts at all. World leaders should go beyond just oratory and playing to the galleries. Without laws, there'd be anarchy. Laws are meant to shape conduct, processes and ways of living. The climate change objective is no different. If we truly desire carbon neutrality in our planet, all countries must get in line. Legislations compelling the migration to renewable energies must take precedence. It must be met with the same urgency and resolve as does the ones on terrorism and other international crisis situations. After all, climate change is a global threat. Holding the renewable energy assets, producing companies to strict regulations. We are now at the core of the embodied carbon mystery. Most countries in Europe have claimed successes in their efforts towards carbon neutrality. Some countries currently generate energy from wind, much more than their energy needs. This at first sight seems a laudable feat. But at what cost? We have one planet where we all live. Just one. Until the day when astrophysicists and other interstellar experts show us another habitable planet, we're all stuck here. And if there's one thing global warming and climate change have taught us, it is that a problem happening anywhere on our planet is a problem to all. I don't know how many carbon-flaring manufacturing companies Scandinavian countries have, but the melting ice caps over there do not care which country emits the carbon. They only understand that the heat levels of our planet have risen, and they're reacting to them. When carbon and GHG's quantities go up, they create a carpet on our atmosphere. The same atmosphere we share. We all eventually suffer the consequences. Given the above, it makes absolutely no sense to have some countries in Asia produce these renewable energy assets, flaring significant amounts of carbon into the atmosphere in the process, while some other countries in the world then think they've achieved some carbon neutrality successes. Besides the fact that science does not support their argument, given that carbon is still flared into the same atmosphere we all use, any claim of achievement at this stage is early and laughable at best. The renewable energy assets produced ensure that power is gotten from renewable sources. The process of making these assets, however, is strangely, mostly through non-renewable sources. Again, the carbon emitted during the production of the renewable energy assets is called embodied carbon, also known as embedded carbon. To ensure that energy gotten from these renewable energy assets is seen as totally zero carbon, we must ensure that the process of producing them is void of any carbon flaring. As a solution to this embodied carbon enigma, this book proposes a process called the carbon repayment cycle, and it is discussed extensively in the next chapter. Before then, let us consider some ways through which we can hold the companies who produce these renewable energy assets to certain standards. It is not enough that they provide tools for mankind to generate energy from renewable sources. The tools they provide must be clean and be subject to scrutiny. It is important to note that not all renewable energy installation assets are produced in Asia. However, a significant number is. And though there are economic gains attendant in the production of these assets, given the employment and other resources that they provide to people in the societies within this region, it is still up to the governments of these concerned countries to ensure that the world doesn't use their environments as carbon dumping grounds. The consequences far outweigh the benefits. If economic reasons, however, compel governments of these producing countries to allow the continued production of renewable energy assets in their nations, they must instill certain standards. Standards, which will be prerequisites for industrial operations. Firstly, all variables suggested in the previous chapter, for manufacturing companies, should apply to renewable energy assets producing companies too. Carbon taxes, the energy migration loan, and a detailed legislation governing the operations of these companies should be considered. Secondly, to compensate countries where these assets are produced, governments in these countries should levy additional export taxes on the grid assets. The taxes can then be passed on to the destination countries as increased costs. Asia has long been the choice location for the establishment of plants and industries, due to the cheap labor there. Many countries in the West, who due to stringent labor laws are unable to set up factories in their countries. These ones then opt Asia as their preferred location. Governments in Asia will do well to recoup the losses incurred to their environment from air pollution through fines. Fines billed as export taxes. Income from these taxes can then be used to improve forestation and vegetation, which absorbs the carbon flared to their atmospheres. This process is not only beneficial to the countries in Asia and other vulnerable countries, but will in the long run also support the world's quest to combat climate change. We clearly noted in the preceding chapter that a gain to a region or country in the world is not necessarily a gain to all. But a loss to a region or country is definitely a loss to all. The third way renewable energy assets producing countries can ensure parity to their environments is by enforcing the carbon repayment cycle through legislation. This carbon repayment cycle is not only beneficial to them, but also provides a win-win situation for all stakeholders. It is the long-lasting strategy that ensures that the world will truly be carbon neutral in a few decades to come. The carbon repayment cycle. The carbon repayment cycle proposition assumes that governmental financial intervention in the transitioning of renewable energy assets manufacturing companies to carbon neutrality is non-existent, or at the barest minimum. It is a structured way to ease renewable assets manufacturing companies from conventional energy sources to renewable ones, without adversely affecting their business operations, longevity, and sustainability. And ultimately, this strategy nullifies the embodied carbon elements, previously prevalent during asset production. For the purpose of this explanation, let us assume the following variables. Our subject assets manufacturing company, ABCZ Industries, is located in Indonesia, Southeast Asia. ABCZ Industries manufactures solar energy panels. Production turnover is appraised quarterly, with a fixed target output of 5,000 solar panels. Each panel after production completion generates 5 kilowatts of electricity. To produce the quarterly turnover, ABCZ Industries requires an average of 15,000 kilowatt-hours of electricity. The conventional energy source used by ABCZ Industries is coal. This energy source incurs carbon emissions, estimated at 525 grams per kilowatt-hour. Find below the suggested carbon repayment cycle proposition for ABCZ Industries. Of the total assets produced in the first quarter, 75% should be sold as procedural, whilst 25% must be retained by the company to keep in store for future energy use. Embodied carbon emissions in the first quarter are still at 100%. This is the first cycle. Fig 2. Fig 3. Cycle 1. In the second quarter, below are the changes consequent. ABCZ Industries incurs some expenses on the purchase of solar inverters and storage batteries. This investment, plus the retained solar panels, are then able to generate some renewable energy for the manufacturing processes. These invariably reduce total dependence on the conventional energy source, coal. See figures 4 and 5 below. Fig 4. To compensate for possible losses during renewable energy supply, and to avoid excessive depletion of the renewable energy grid, ABCZ Industries only takes a portion of the available energy supplied by the installed solar grid during this second quarter. This portion accounts for a third of the total required energy for manufacturing processes. The other 2/3 is gotten from the conventional source. Fig 5. Of the total assets now produced in this second quarter, 75% should be sold as usual, whilst 25% must be retained by the company to add to the installed solar grid for an improved power generation capacity. Embodied carbon emissions here in the second quarter have plummeted to 66.7%. Cycle 2. By the third quarter, significant progress has been made by ABCZ Industries in their pursuit to eradicate embodied carbon. ABCZ Industries again incurs some expenses to upgrade the capacities of the solar grid's existing inverters and storage batteries. This investment, plus the total retained solar panels, increase the amount of renewable energy generated for the manufacturing processes. Dependence on the conventional energy source, coal, is now at the barest minimum. See figures 6 and 7 below. Fig 6. Again, to compensate for possible losses during renewable energy supply, and to avoid excessive depletion of the solar grid, ABCZ Industries only takes a portion of energy supply from the installed solar grid during this quarter. But the difference now is that they can afford to take 2/3 of their total energy requirement from the solar grid installation. The other third is gotten from the conventional source. Fig 7. Of the total assets produced in this third quarter, 75% should be sold as usual, whilst 25% must be retained by the company to add to the installed solar grid for an improved capacity generation. Embodied carbon emissions here in the third quarter have plummeted to 33.3%. Cycle 3. By the fourth quarter, ABCZ Industries can confidently power their operations on renewable energy solely, fulfilling their pursuit to totally eradicate embodied carbon. ABCZ Industries again incurs some expenses to upgrade the capacities of the existing inverters and storage batteries. This investment plus the total retained solar panels provide the total amount of renewable energy required for the manufacturing processes. Energy from coal is no longer required in this fourth quarter. See figures 8 and 9 below. Fig 8. In this quarter, despite the expected possible losses during renewable energy supply and the need to avoid excessive depletion of the solar grid, ABCZ Industries can still confidently power their manufacturing operations with the installed solar grid. Energy is 100% from renewables, implying the absence of embodied carbon. True carbon neutrality. Fig 9. Of the total assets produced in this fourth quarter, 100% can be sold, as none is needed for retainer until solar grid assets near the end of their useful life. And when this occurs, ABCZ Industries can start the carbon repayment cycle 3 quarters before the expected expiration of the installed grid's efficiency. Embodied carbon emissions in the fourth quarter are 0%. Cycle 4. The carbon repayment cycle is applicable for use to all companies who manufacture renewable energy assets. The proposition can be tailored to the operations of these manufacturing plants. The goal is to ensure that the production operations of these asset manufacturing companies are void of embodied carbon. The carbon repayment cycle facilitates this. The nature. Conservation option. The pursuit of international organizations in the recent past has been to stem the tide of deforestation. Campaigns have been made to encourage wood-related businesses who cut down trees to plant a tree for every tree that is cut down. There has also been the drive to have governments infuse nature parks into local neighborhood environments and reduce the rate at which forests are converted to urban centers. Perhaps the world needs to take the bull by the horn. We should stop playing catch-up with carbon and being on the defensive. We should take the offensive approach. The fight to combat global warming is a long fight. And I must allude that we cannot afford to fight fair. As much as all recommendations in this book, which seek to suggest ways to compensate our atmosphere and planet for all carbon flared, sound admissible, we really need to drive towards pushing the numbers the other way. All former talk has always been about reducing GHGs in our atmosphere. Perhaps we need to think of infusing as much oxygen as possible into the atmosphere to twist the scales. Let's give our scientists a new problem to deal with. And this scenario is really achievable. Let's review this. The body of the Earth is currently occupied by water to a length of 2/3. The seas do not dispel significant carbon, if any, into our atmosphere, which implies that the GHGs that have constantly given us nightmares are just the result of activities that occur on 1/3 of the Earth's circumference. The portion where humans live. In this area, which is within our control, we need to increase our forest reserves. Aside from the Amazon, Congo basin and the Daintree rainforests, very few forests on Earth today contribute quite a significant amount of oxygen into our atmosphere. And here lies our problem. Gladly, also the pathway to the solution. As a viable response to the climate change problem on Earth today, countries in our world need to come together and ensure that half of that 1/3 portion of the Earth that is covered by man is proliferated with forests. This is a radical approach, and the results will trump the initial sacrifice. To achieve this, governments of all countries must show resolve. There must be the will to encroach deserts with forestation. Urban centers, roads and highways must be lined with trees. Rivers and seabeds must be converted to mangrove swamps and rainforests. We must be intentional in our approach to make the Earth green. And we should not stop until astronauts in shuttles millions of miles away in space look down at the Earth and see only water. Water with some green surface patches.